Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for our free webinar, Spring Clean Your Liver, featuring Dr. Rekha Lund. My name is Jeff, Education Marketing Manager here at LASA OMS. For over 40 years, LASA OMS has been striving to promote the growth of the acupuncture industry by providing quality products, great prices, and the best customer service, as well as supporting the many schools and continuing education efforts available. With our free webinar series, we intend to provide free educational opportunities taught by some of our industry's most renowned practitioners and educators. I would like to take a moment to acclimate you to the webinar room. To the right of the video screen, you'll see 3 tabs: Chat, Questions, and Polls. To chat with other attendees or to communicate any technical difficulties, please use the Chat tab. For questions of the guest speaker, please make sure to use the Questions tab to the right of the chat to assure that we see it. Please note that each webinar is recorded, and immediately following the conclusion, you will all receive an email with a link to view the video on demand and a copy of the slides. You may always visit our blog and use the free webinar tag to find all of our previously recorded events. From neuroscience to sports acupuncture to Chinese herbs, you'll find something interesting for every practitioner on the LASA OMS blog. And now for our featured speaker. Dr. Lund owns and operates comprehensive natural healthcare in Los Angeles, California, where she specializes in combining physical therapy, nutrition, herbal medicine, yoga, Pilates, and acupuncture to address a variety of problems, including joint and muscle pain, digestive problems, stress-related problems, menstrual and menopausal symptoms, and allergies. Her passion for natural healing paved the way for her unique educational background, combining Western medical expertise in physical therapy and Eastern herbal medicine and acupuncture. Dr. Lund utilizes nutrition, emotional well-being, sleep, and exercise as the foundations for optimal health. She is the co-author of the textbook Traditional Chinese Medicine, an international collaboration of Chinese medicine experts from both China and the West, covering the theory and practice of Chinese internal medicine in greater depth than any English language textbook available. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lund.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. Thank you to LASA, and appreciate all of you being here today. I know it's almost the long weekend, so I appreciate you all coming here tonight. So welcome. This is Spring Clean Your Liver, and I thought it was a great time to introduce this topic. We're in a very interesting time in the world, and we want to start working on improving our overall health, working with our patients. So this is for you, and it's also for our patients. And I feel that, the better we take care of ourselves, then we can implement those same strategies with our patients as well. So looking forward to being with you here tonight. And if you have questions along the way, please type them in the question box, and Jeff is going to pose them to me later on throughout the webinar. And looking forward to sharing this time with you. So welcome. Came up with this topic during the pandemic because it's something that I think that most people were very, very interested in doing. Maybe not early on, but definitely as the pandemic continued, people were starting to gain weight. Now they're really ready to get rid of that extra weight. And so now I think we're in a different time in our history. And so taking us to our first slide, so why should we spring clean? I think with all the changes in the world and in our society and perhaps in our immediate community as well, this might be the most important time in our history to spend some energy on self-care, nourishing our body, and gaining some new healthy habits. And why not put a special focus on nutrition, cooking vegetables, and even experiment with some new foods? So this is something that I generally do with all my patients anyway. On visit number 1, I usually try to engage them in maybe one new thing, and that could be food, it could be something lifestyle related. And I feel by doing that, whether they're here for acupuncture, herbal medicine, or physical therapy, I feel by doing that, they're taking you with them. And so you stay with them in their life. And so the next time they go to the grocery store, or their next time they're out having dinner, perhaps cooking with their family, they'll kind of start to see food a little bit differently. And sometimes that voice will stay with them. And then you really have this tremendous impact on their lifestyle. And I have seen with many, many patients that gradually it allows us to build the relationship. They start to gradually improve their overall lifestyle. And then at that point, I feel like whatever we do, whether it's herbal medicine, acupuncture, whatever treatment we do in the clinic, I find it to be more effective because now they're eating better and we're actually improving the health of their tissues and their overall outlook. Many people start to feel better emotionally as well. So a lot of really great benefits to changing people's diet. And then people will say, well, I eat really well. Do I need to do this? Do I need to spring clean my liver? I mean, even amongst us, like if you could, when you get a moment, put in the chat the what you've eaten today. Just give me an idea of what you had for breakfast, lunch. Maybe some of you have had dinner already. Be very interesting to see what you've had today. But, even for someone who's eating very, very well and relatively clean, and I think us as a group, we're eating very, very well generally, we still are exposed to toxins. We still are often surrounded by foods that are not organic. Of course, pesticides. Some people are on medication. I know many of our patients are. Whoever's done COVID vaccine, and I'm sure perhaps vaccines in the past, there's aluminum in many of them. Some of them still have mercury. Paint in our homes, apartments, almost all rice in the world has arsenic, which is really sad, but almost all rice has arsenic in it. Preservatives are everywhere. Plastic, even with our best intentions with using BPA-free plastic, there's still other chemicals in there. Pollution, of course, which is pretty hard to escape. Alcohol, smoking, obesity, hormones, cosmetic products. The number one that I'll get into a little bit more today is sugar, high fructose corn syrup. And then, of course, wheat, corn, soy, and any processed foods. And then, of course, stress. Living in any big city, generally stress. So great job with the foods here. So I figured we'd be a pretty healthy group. But yeah, we've got some really, really great foods here. So veggies, some chicken, walnuts, almonds, goji berries. Jeff's getting hungry. So some great foods. And I figured, we'd be a pretty healthy group. And I think that most of our patients probably wouldn't eat the way we do, but maybe over time, as you present them with these kinds of ideas, that maybe they will start to shift. And I'm sure that many of you do already discuss diet with your patients. Just to review some of the basic anatomy, we won't go into a lot of detail, but just to refresh how the liver and heart are connected, because, with all these tributaries from our intestine, our pancreas, and the stomach as well, that blood, that deoxygenated blood via the hepatic portal vein will go through the liver. And then from there, it's going to go to the heart and then become oxygenated. So it's a cycle of oxygenated, deoxygenated blood. And hopefully the liver's doing a good job of cleansing the blood. But what if, the liver's not doing a good job? Then that deoxygenated blood goes back to the heart, and it's not totally clean, if you want to call it that. It's not totally clean, but it's not only going to the heart, but it's also going to the rest of the body as well. And one piece that's not on here is the brain. So every organ is affected by the liver health. And that's why I do often emphasize the health of our liver. Of course, we want to take care of the other organs as well. But this is a big component in how quickly we can change our liver health. And therefore, we can change our whole body's health, including mentally, emotionally as well. The importance of healthy liver function, as I was saying, it can affect us in so many different ways. So any inflammation of the liver can interfere with our function and can lead to poor health, period. So that is probably the summary of my talk today. Any liver issue, and I'm seeing it in people who are very, very young, even teenagers, typically related to diet, almost always related to diet in most people. And the beautiful part about what we do as in our practices is that we can actually be the strongest voice and strongest influence on our patients, because as we know, when they see their MD or perhaps other healthcare practitioners, that they don't often impact them in the same way. Perhaps they don't have time, or they just don't even have the medical training actually in regard to nutrition. So we are really in a really unique position to be able to impart this type of information to our patients. And we generally do have more time with them, and we do see them often generally as well. So they really look to us, I think, for this kind of information. And during the height of COVID, I was working with a lot of patients on their immune system health and kept coming back to the liver because a big part of our immune system stems from our liver health. So if our liver's not doing a good job, our immune system can't do a good job either. So of course, our digestive health, kidney, brain, and cardiovascular system all depend on a healthy and well-functioning liver. All of the body systems are affected by a diseased liver, and therefore the liver disease can have many varied symptoms. And this year in particular, I've seen a lot of different miscellaneous kinds of symptoms that don't ever get a medical diagnosis. And patients sometimes will get frustrated because they don't have a name for their problem. And I'll just tell them, we have a way to diagnose this in Eastern medicine. And so we'll do a pattern diagnosis, and I'll talk to them about that. But then I'll bring it back to language that they can understand and relate to, and talk about the liver health and how the liver is connected to all of these various symptoms and why it's so important to keep the liver functioning well. If the liver is damaged, its ability to fight infections is impaired, and it's very resilient, but liver disease can seriously interrupt essential functions. And let's talk about the resilience a little bit, because we're going to get into blood tests a little bit, but to show disease in the liver is not so easy to do. And sometimes many people have a quote unquote normal blood test, but they do still have some liver disease that's just not showing up yet. So for most people, I'm going to assume that they have some sort of liver issue, whatever that would be, and you can define that however you like. But I would say that they're starting to have some sort of liver dysfunction, even at a young age, just because of the world we live in, with all the pollution and toxins in our environment. I think this is a challenge for everybody, even people who eat as well as we do. I'm looking at everybody's foods, and even though we're eating well, we're still surrounded by toxins in our environment. And I know many of us take steps to limit that as much as we can, but it's still there. And so we do need to take better care of ourselves in this regard. So as I was saying, people often will come in. Sometimes they'll bring their blood test with them. Sometimes they'll just tell me like, oh yeah, I had my blood test and everything was quote unquote normal. And I usually ask them I tell them I want to see it, because sometimes like for ALT, for example, or AST, if they're up in the 40s, even in the 30s, to me, in my opinion, that's high. And depending on the issue with the person and depending on their personality, I may have that discussion with them. Like, let's work on getting this a little bit lower, even though you're in the normal range. The way I'll say it to them is, you're doing okay, you're in the normal range, but I want you to be excellent. And so let's get it to an excellent number. Like, in the range is just in the range and kind of okay and acceptable. But to me, it's still a little bit too high. So let's work on getting that down. It's a sign that something is starting. And so let's catch it before it gets worse. Same with all these other numbers. So these are just a basic overview of some liver function tests. And kidney function also very closely overlaps with liver function as well. So sometimes we'll start to see a kidney problem before we start to see a liver issue, because the kidneys' blood vessels are much, much smaller. And so often the kidneys are stressed much sooner than the liver. And as I was saying earlier, the liver is very resilient. And sometimes I've seen a lot of research showing that the liver has to be at least 50% dysfunctional for it to even manifest on a blood test. So that's a lot of liver disease for it to even show up. And so many people are walking around and thinking they have a normal liver function, and they could already be suffering from some of these problems. And the important thing to remember is that if the liver is struggling, then all of our other body organs are going to struggle as well. So this is what people say, right? But my liver's fine. And so again, just to reiterate, the blood test does not always reveal mild liver dysfunction, and typically will only manifest when there's moderate or serious liver disease. And that's the one thing I always will convey to my patients, is that, if we're striving for excellence, then we want to catch these things before they're a problem. And so most people, I'm working with them on their liver health anyway, even if their blood test is quote unquote normal. And this is just some information for your reference in regard to some of those details about this test that I generally look at, mostly ALT, AST. And then if I'm seeing any other things jump out, like bilirubin sometimes will be elevated. If we're starting to see those elevated, then sometimes those other ones can be elevated as well. It really depends on that person's pattern. But I don't rely entirely on the blood test because often these numbers are normal. That doesn't mean that the person does not have a liver problem. And that's very, very important to discuss with your patients because many people think that their liver's fine and it probably isn't. And then some other things you can do that may have more of an immediate type of result could be something like CRP, which is C-reactive protein, high sensitivity. That one is pretty reliable. And it's something I tell people, like even someone who's living a very healthy lifestyle, it could be a good way to have like a baseline of your overall health. It does measure overall inflammation, even though it's often viewed as a cardiac test. I use it as an overall marker of inflammation. And then hemoglobin A1C, if there's any elevation there. I mean, I have a lot of people who eat very, very well, generally very well, but perhaps they have some sensitivities to certain foods, or perhaps they're not processing sugar well. And when I say sugar, that could even include fruit. Because some people, especially now summer's coming, some people eat 4 to 6 fruits a day. And for that particular individual, if the rest of their diet's great, and they're say at 5.9, 5.8 even, and there's somebody who's striving for excellence, and I always tell them that I'm striving for them to be excellent, then I will work with them on the hemoglobin A1C as well, as a way to indicate their overall inflammation, the overall stress on their kidneys and liver. When hemoglobin A1C is even slightly elevated, even if they're not diabetic, even not even pre-diabetic, but if they're chronically elevated, then that could be a sign that their kidney and liver is being stressed. So there's, of course, the overlap function of the kidney and liver to detoxify our body. The other number I often use pretty heavily is GFR, which is our kidney filtration. And that's the way I'll describe it to patients. Because if that's low, then that's a marker that their kidneys are not functioning quickly enough. And that could be a reason that they'll have a little bit of backup of toxin in their body. And that is something that we can work with them on as well. But I use these numbers more often because the liver, as I was saying, often won't reflect liver disease. But the kidneys will pretty early on. And so usually we'll start to see kidney dysfunction before we'll see liver dysfunction on blood tests. But there's other ways we can assess the person's health, of course, from traditional medicine and pulse taking and all the other things that we do. This is just a different way of assessing our patients. Liver ultrasound can reveal fatty liver, non-alcoholic fatty liver. But usually it's silent, and most of our patients are not going to get a liver ultrasound unless we're suspecting that they have either fatty liver. But most people, even when fatty liver is suspected, most people are not getting a liver ultrasound unless I somehow urge them to do that for some reason. And I have had several fairly young patients who I've encouraged them to do this test, and they did have quite severe fatty liver. You know, I would say, like, if we had to pick a number, like in the 60% range. So and that's people who are like 40 years old. So it's quite surprising because, and they're often surprised, their blood test was normal. They generally feel okay, but there'll be something that just doesn't quite make sense. And then that's when I'll start to do a little bit more investigation. So this is an overall view of how fatty liver progresses, the spectrum basically. So NAFLD is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and this is more and more common nowadays. So fat accumulates in the liver. You'll start to see little dots as shown here, and it's just like infiltration of fat. At this early stage, it's still reversible, and this is probably happening in most 20-year-olds that eat like a standard American diet, maybe some fast food, soda, soft drinks, I would say, are the number one culprit, especially high fructose corn syrup. So that tends to create fat in the liver, and at that stage, it's still reversible if the person drastically changes their diet and they eliminate certain foods. When we get into stage 2, this is non-alcoholic steato meaning fat, hepatitis, which is basically just inflammation of the liver, but it's fat infiltrating the liver. Now, because the fat's been sitting there for some time, the fat will now start to create some inflammation and ultimately scarring. Once the liver gets scarred, that tissue is no longer functioning, and so that person has now lost some liver function, which is dangerous over time. They've lost the ability to detox their body. They can no longer send pure, clean blood to all the tributary, all the heart tissue, the brain tissue, etc. And so they're starting to lose some liver function. And at this stage, when it's starting to scar, that tissue usually is difficult to reverse the scarring. It is still possible if it's early enough, but I would say it's starting to get to the point where it's irreversible. But if you intervene at that stage, then at least they can preserve the remaining tissue in their liver. And then, of course, over time, they develop even more scar tissue, and then that scar tissue starts to replace the functioning liver cells. And then this person ultimately will end up with more serious disease. And then this is an actual liver. So healthy liver, as you can see, it's like very bright and red and clean looking. And then you start to see all the yellow tissue, which is fat, that just overtakes the functioning liver cells. And down below, you see a cross section of how that actually looks. And so when you see that picture on the right of the unhealthy liver, all that white tissue is non-functioning cells. And really, you're left with about maybe 40% of the liver cells that are still functioning. And going back to how the liver and heart are connected. So cholesterol, we know, is made in the liver, but it can be elevated by overconsumption of processed foods, perhaps overconsumption of red meat, processed red meat, I should say, elevated stress, and then, of course, sugar. So right now, we're in this time of change in regard to cholesterol and heart disease. I think people are starting to understand that eggs are not altogether bad, and lowering cholesterol is really not the full answer to improving heart disease. But I think still today, most people don't make that connection between sugar and heart disease. I think people are still, I think modern mainstream media is catching up to what we know as natural medicine practitioners in the connection between sugar and cholesterol, sugar and heart disease. But I think it's going to take the next 10 years or so for that information to be really mainstream media. And so we are on this, we're in this field of being on the brink of change with our patients, where we start to have this discussion with our patients. And often they'll say, oh, I didn't know that. Or, oh yeah, I kind of started, to hear a little bit about that. But we can be that, that healthcare practitioner that can really target the sugar consumption with our patients and really working with them on that one particular issue. If we combine the cholesterol issue with inflammation, then over time that can cause heart disease. But we know that lowering cholesterol alone is not the answer. We really need to target the inflammation, the sugar consumption, exercise, of course, stress. So there's so many factors. And I hope that now people are understanding that cholesterol is not the only issue. Heart disease is the leading cause of death for men, women, and people of most racial and ethnic groups in the United States. One person dies every 37 seconds in the United States from cardiovascular disease, and about 647 people die every year from heart disease. That's 1 in every 4 deaths is related to heart disease. And I brought this up because often we think of heart health and we talk about heart health, and it's such a big issue in our media. And we don't often make that connection between heart disease and liver health. And so I always come back to liver health, because if our liver's not doing well, then our heart cannot be doing well either. And so there's so many things that people do for heart health, such as exercise, and they still tell me, oh, I'm eating a low-fat diet. I mean, it really depends on how you define fat. And there are, of course, healthy fats, and I think that's becoming more common now to have those discussions, to eat healthy fats and stay away from the unhealthy fats. But it's not just fat. And so the sugar issue is something I think that's still missing from perhaps some of our discussions, and also from our patients' minds as well. But definitely in the media, we don't really hear that much about sugar. We hear about fat still. And people still are afraid of eating butter and, nuts perhaps. So I think it's really important. And we, as I was saying earlier, we are in that position to give this information to our patients. And they're not going to get this information from their MD, whether primary doctor, cardiologist. There's really, I don't think, any MDs that are really able to have these discussions with their patients. So it's a really important role that we play in our country's health, but in our patients' health, in our country's health as well, and in our own personal health as well. So coronary artery disease is the most common type of heart disease. About 18.2 million adults age 20. So this number's changed. It didn't used to be age 20, but it's dropped so much. And so age 20 and older have coronary artery disease. It's really sad to say that that number's dropped so much in the last several years that we're now looking at people, I would say even younger, maybe even in their early teens, have some form of heart disease. And we know this from some military autopsies and things like that, that we are seeing heart disease very, very young. About 2 in 10 deaths from coronary artery disease happen in adults less than 65 years old. So it is happening younger and younger. And there's quite a bit of research, but also I see it clinically too, that I would say it's mostly diet related. Of course, stress plays a role too, but we have that position as well to help our patients with stress, but definitely with diet too. And in the United States, someone has a heart attack every 40 seconds, and every year about 805,000 Americans have a heart attack. Of these, 605,000 are a first heart attack. And this part's really interesting, which is why I kept it on here. 200,000 people happen to people who have already had a heart attack. So those are second heart attacks. And about 1 in 5 heart attacks is silent. So that's a lot of people. That's, 20% or so, 20%. The damage is done, but the person didn't know it. So perhaps they had some tests later on and they saw that, they had a heart attack in the past and they didn't even know. So it's pretty dangerous to see how these problems accumulate over time, and many of these issues are silent. Other risk factors, as plaque builds up in the arteries, in somebody who has heart disease, the inside of the artery begins to narrow, and then they're restricting the flow of blood. So remember the picture earlier with the liver sending deoxygenated blood to the heart, then the heart sends oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. If the heart is now, let's say the liver's diseased and the liver can't send pure, clean blood to the heart, and now the heart's also having a problem, and we can't get all that oxygenated blood out of the heart arteries, then over time, we're just getting less and less oxygen to all of our other tissues, in particular our heart itself, oxygenated blood going back to the liver, and then of course our brain as well. So the more inflammation the person has, the more likely that this kind of pattern is to develop. And the other thing that can happen is that the plaque can break off, and then ultimately that can cause a heart attack or a stroke. And these other risk factors, such as high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, there's a little bit of controversy about that. I think that could be another seminar, Jeff. I think I would love to do that at some point and talk specifically about cholesterol some more. But smoking, of course, is a risk factor as well. And about half of Americans, this is really alarming, but about half of Americans have at least one of these 3 risk factors. So either high blood pressure, high blood cholesterol, smoking, and then now we're seeing this obesity epidemic. It's really, really scary to see how many people are dealing with these issues. The beauty, though, is that we can help people to reverse these patterns. And I've seen and worked with so many people who have completely reversed these issues, whether it's diabetes, high blood pressure, getting to a healthy cholesterol level, reducing weight, quitting smoking. We are, I think, as a field, very unique in being able to address these issues, been able to get a lot of people off of their medications. And it's not just about the medication, but it's, even people who are have a good blood pressure on medication, they still have a lot of inflammation. They're still eating inflammatory foods, and it really is just a huge Band-Aid on the problem. And when people change their diet, it really helps to address the foundational issue and get to the source of the problem, and really reversing people's potential for serious diseases. And then physical inactivity is also a risk factor, and then excessive alcohol use are other risk factors as well. Let's talk a little bit about cancer, because I think that correlation is a little bit more clear as to how our liver health can impact the cancer risk. You can see the numbers here. I mean, they're staggering. Over 1.5 million people, new cases of cancer reported. This was going back to 2016. 598,000 people died of cancer. For every 100,000 people, there was 436 new cases and 156 people that died of cancer. So we all know that this is a big, big problem in the United States. Cancer is the second leading cause of death in the United States, exceeded only by heart disease. And 1 of every 4 deaths is due to cancer. This is a view from the CDC, also in 2016, the top 10 cancers, and several of them are hormonal, female breast cancer and prostate cancer. And then we've got some other hormonal cancers here as well. But if we think of toxins in general in our environment and where they tend to accumulate and how they impact our hormonal system, and even estrogen in and of itself, if the body's accumulating excess estrogen and the body cannot filter it properly through the liver, then this ultimately, over many, many years and over time, can ultimately lead to a failing of the immune system, an accumulation of toxins, and then ultimately breast cancer. Prostate cancer is definitely on the rise. I mean, all cancers are on the rise. So we really need to intervene in what I call foundational health. And foundational health are the pillars I'll discuss with patients, which are food, stress, sleep, our emotional and our emotional well-being, and our support system. This is from the Archives of Internal Medicine, and this was just an overview of red meat consumption, and they generally pointed to processed meat, but there was another study that also looked at red meat in general, whether it was grass-fed meat, organic, etc., compared to processed red meat. And the results were very, very similar, which was a little bit surprising to see, even with good quality meat, that this was still a very similar result. So I thought that was really interesting, that as people eat more red meat per day, that the mortality rate goes up as well. Sugar. So this is one of my favorite topics because almost everybody I see is consuming some kind of sugar. And people will often say, well, I'm not eating sugar, but then I'll break it down and say, well, what about the bread and what about the pasta? Sugar, of course, in and of itself. And once we get on the bread topic, people get a little bit nervous, I would say. I think from looking at everybody's diet that they showed me what they ate today, their consumption today, I didn't see that. So good job, everybody. But, many of our patients are still eating bread. And so that's still, to me, refined food and processed food. And bread, depending on, where it's from and how it's made, of course. But wheat in and of itself can also turn into sugar over time. Depends on the quality of the food, of course. But I do work with people, usually on visit 1, to make some sort of change. I don't want to overwhelm them either. So I try to find out where they are with their diet in general, and depends on why they're here as well. If they come in with an orthopedic issue, I might not go real into depth with the diet, but depends on the person and their approach to their lifestyle. And so thank you for your feedback there. So it's okay, it's okay. And that's the other thing I'll tell them. I see somebody had ice cream, so it's okay. And that's something that I always want to convey to my patients as well. I'm not here to criticize them. I'm not here to, I'm here to support you, so I'm here to support you, and we're going to get through this process together. And if you eat well, 95% of the time, you're doing great. And if you have an occasional dessert, or you have an occasional something or other at a party or something like that, it's really okay. I really want to look at what you're eating for a month or 2 or 3, and not just say, oh, you had a cookie, oh, you messed your whole program up. No, it's not that cut and dry, So it's okay if somebody has a little something here and there, as long as it's not an everyday habit, and really just looking at the big picture of their diet. So the liver specifically uses refined sugar and fructose to make fat. We're going to talk a little bit more about fructose specifically, because as I mentioned earlier, even people who are seemingly doing a good job, like there's many people I work with who are pre-diabetic, diabetic, and they still eat fruit, they still eat corn, And those things still have quite a bit of fructose in them, of course, depending on the numbers. But there's many people who have 3, 4, 5 fruits a day, and they think they're doing something good for themselves. And they, often will come back with, well, it's got a lot of vitamin C, or it has a lot of fiber, or whatever they say. And my comeback is, well, yeah, but so do vegetables, and vegetables don't have the sugar. So depending on the depth of the conversation, then, you can go into more detail. But generally, most people are not sometimes expecting that conversation. And so it's a very delicate balance of giving them information without criticism. But if they're engaged and they start to ask questions, then you can go into a little bit more detail. Some studies show that sugar can be as damaging to the liver as alcohol, even if you're not overweight. And I've seen this a lot as well with people who are very, very lean, but they do eat a lot of sugar, and they have either they're diabetic or they have fatty liver. And so being overweight is not always a sign of liver health. And although natural and promoted as healthy alternatives, agave, honey, and maple syrup still have a significant amount of fructose. So here's my quiz for the day. If anyone can guess, don't look, okay? Don't go search the internet. If you can tell me percentage-wise, agave, what percentage fructose does agave have? Just throw out some percentages. If you've looked already, then don't answer. If you haven't looked, just guess. 25, 90, 50, 20, 50, 20. So the answer is 50. So agave is 50% fructose. And if you remember back, like I would say maybe 8 years ago or so, agave was promoted, and it's still being promoted, as a healthy alternative to sugar. And so it became very, very popular, and there was a lot of foods that started having it. People were using agave in their tea or coffee, etc. And so it's one of those foods that still has a high amount of fructose, and that fructose can go straight to the liver and impact the liver. And the liver has to now deal with the fructose, and often it'll get converted to fat. Okay. Margaritas. I love it. So, okay. So what about honey? What percentage, what percentage of honey is fructose? Again, just some guesses here. So 35, 80, 75. Yeah, so they're up there, right? So I'm sorry. So I made a mistake. So agave is actually around 80, depending on the type of agave. Agave is about 80. Honey's about 50. So excuse me on that. So agave is about 80. Sorry about that. So agave is about 80% fructose. So that was why I put it here today. So to show that agave, though promoted as a health food, it does go straight to the liver as fructose and is now a burden on the liver. And honey is as well. Even though honey is a healthy alternative, it has quite a bit of fructose in it. And so there's still sugar. And maple syrup, even though it doesn't have as much fructose, it's actually pretty low in fructose, but it is still sugar. And so the sugar and sucrose in and of itself can impact the liver's health as well. And that burden on the liver is now taking away from the liver's job of doing other roles that it should be doing, like dealing with pollution, for example, or pesticides in our food, or any other toxins in our environment. So is regular sugar better than agave? I would probably say yes. Yes, because it has a lower amount of fructose. But still, generally, we want to lower the sugar in general. But if somebody's going to eat sugar, then I would pick maple syrup and or sugar. Artificial sweeteners have problems too. I mean, this is a whole other seminar in and of itself. And I think we can go into a lot more depth on this. But I think that if I had to pick one, maple syrup, next would be sugar, coconut sugar. There's all these other ones out there now. So I think we can lead this into another talk specifically about sugar. But generally, my goal with most patients is to take the sugar out completely. And people are like, oh my gosh, it's really hard to do. And it is hard to do. But once you start having that conversation, then perhaps they can reconsider some of these other foods that they're having. And maybe they can work on taking one thing out of their diet. And that's really the goal, especially in the first couple of weeks that I'm working with somebody. I might just have them reconsider one food, and then we'll gradually move to other things. And over time, the goal is to get the sugar out completely, especially if their hemoglobin A1C is elevated, especially if they're pre-diabetic or diabetic already, or if we're seeing any other inflammatory kinds of conditions. So, so this is really interesting as well. Replacing calorically equal amounts of glucose with fructose increases liver fat by 38% in only 8 days. The converse is true as well. If you can reverse that you can reverse that by eliminating fructose. And I have seen people reverse fatty liver. The issue was we couldn't get the test quickly, but I would say it probably happened in about 3 weeks, but the person waited about 2 months and then got another test. And the fatty liver issue was about 25% better in about 2 months. This person was trying to get life insurance and came to me specifically to get life insurance, and he wanted to get his liver function better. And he had been diagnosed with fatty liver disease. And it's kind of sad because after he got the life insurance, he went back to his lifestyle, and he was at the time like in his early 40s. So, but the good news was that it is doable. And I'll tell people that they can change their fatty liver issue. If it's in that early stage, as I showed you earlier, they can reduce their hemoglobin A1C in about 3 months. I mean, that's the measure of hemoglobin A1C, but they can start to show improvement if they really work on reducing or eliminating completely sugar. So that is a nice thing to look forward to. And the great news is that it can change pretty quickly. So where to begin with patients depends on the patient. You know, if somebody's very in tune with their health, then perhaps you can address all of these factors pretty early on. Typically, most patients are not at that level, but some of them are. And so if they are, then we can have a more in-depth discussion on some of these things. It really depends on the person and what their issue is, but sometimes I'll talk about diet on day one, and then perhaps if they don't have their blood test with them, then I might have them bring that in another time or send it to me, and then we'll talk about some of those details on the blood work. And if they're in the range, then it's a different discussion because they've been told already that your blood test is great. So it really depends on the approach, you know, and the person, and their personality, because you don't want to alarm them. But I'll just tell them that what I told you earlier, that, you know, this is looking pretty good. You're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. Let's work on getting your A1C down just a little bit more, because I think it'll help your knee, you know, your knee pain or something like that. Or I think it can help your headaches because we're focusing on, if we use the word inflammation with patients, I think they understand that language. And so let's work on getting your inflammation a little bit better. You're doing great right now, but let's make it even better. And then they can see that you're supporting them, and you're not criticizing them, and you're just working on helping them to improve their health, which is why they're coming to us. And same thing with the triglycerides. I really like having the blood work, even though I know in traditional Asian medicine, we don't often rely on that, but having that as a marker for our patients can be really helpful, because it's something that is really objective. It's something that they can see the improvements. They might feel better, but most patients, as we know, don't often remember that they felt terribly 3 months ago and now they're doing great. But if we can point to, oh, your triglycerides are now, you know, 20% better, or their A1C dropped to 0.1 degree or something like that. CRP is now better. So those are the kinds of things that even taking their weight, sometimes I'll take their weight on day one and perhaps they dropped 3 pounds or something like that. So those are just things I keep reminding them of, just so they can see their progress, monitor their progress, and continue the relationship, because it's a way to engage them in their health and not just addressing their problem that they came in with. So let's say, for example, somebody came in with back pain and now their back pain's better. This is a way that you can still continue the relationship long-term and really forever, because this is a way to improve their overall well-being. And most people have more than one problem. They might come to you for back pain, but then they've also got something else, some other medical issue perhaps that you can now work with them on. And often they'll say like, oh, my MD didn't tell me that. And, people start to see the value in what we do. And it's not just about treating their pain, and you can engage them in a different way. So, and then there's also hair analysis to look for heavy metals. That's also a great test to look for liver dysfunction. As I was saying, blood markers are often not totally reliable. It shows us how toxic the person is when we look at their other markers on hair tests, mineral levels as well. Copper is also considered an essential mineral, but it's also toxic if we have too much copper. And we can also look at adrenal function as well. So these are just measurements. More and more on the hair test, I see many people with mercury, arsenic, and a really big one is aluminum. And this is a very, very common one, and that can affect people's memory over time. And now the rates of dementia are staggering as well. And so that's something that, even somebody who's, say, 40 years old, you can start to engage them in that conversation, especially if they have a relative who is dealing with dementia or perhaps had dementia or something like that. And I'll have that discussion with them. Same with osteoporosis. Like, this is the time to work on it, when you are young and healthy. And I always compliment them, and I'll tell them, when you're young and healthy, even people who are in their 70s, I'll say, do it now while you're young and healthy. And then they always say, oh, thank you. And they feel good about that. But I'd say, no, seriously, physiologically, your body's young. Even though, you're 75, you're doing a great job taking care of yourself. And I'll just really make them feel good. And it's honest. It's not like I'm pumping them up. It's, it's honest. Like, you're really doing a good job. And you, as a 75-year-old, are much healthier than some of my 50-year-olds because you're taking good care of yourself. You're exercising. You're doing all these really, really great things. So physiologically, your body's behaving like you're 55. I have an 86-year-old woman right now, and she's doing everything I ask her to do. And she's turned her diet around completely. She lost weight, and her blood test looks amazing. I just saw her a couple days ago, and she had an argument with her MD because she reversed a lot of diseases, actually, many different things. And about a year ago, he wanted to put her on a statin and blood pressure medication. And she said, give me some time. And he didn't really want to give her time. So this is now a year later. And she's improved her hemoglobin A1C tremendously. She's like in the normal, not only normal, but ideal range. Same with her blood pressure. And she never ended up taking medication. And so she's really excited. I was really excited for her. And she's 86. So she's the model patient. So I tell everybody about her because I just tell her, I was like, if she can do it, then anybody can. And she's really just an outstanding patient to have. And it's really, even for me personally, it's been really amazing to see that at her age, she's been able to reverse many different medical conditions. So pretty exciting. The omega-3 index is also, we have another slide on the omega-3 index. So this is also a great way to look at our overall state of inflammation. And also it gives you an idea of omega-6 versus omega-3. The brain health is really interesting to look at in relationship to omega-3, heart health as well. I mean, there's so many studies on omega-3 now. And looking at, most people are taking it, but even if they're taking it, this test helps me to understand if they're taking enough, because some people need more. And most people need some, but most people are they're eating salmon regularly, preferably wild salmon, and they're taking omega-3 as well. Ideally, if you do this test, ideally you're up around 8% or so. The average in Japan is 9 to 10%. And the average in the United States is less than 4%. So this is measured as a percentage in the blood. And we want the omega-3 to be relatively high. There's also omega-3 and omega-6. So you could measure omega-6 as well. And we want omega-6 to be relatively low. Most people are eating too much omega-6. It is essential, but we don't want too much either. So when we look at studies showing the omega-3 index of more than 8%, compared to people who are at less than 44%, the coronary artery disease risk was lowered by 70%. Pretty remarkable findings. And so this is a way to just another source of income. You can offer this test to patients as well. And when you're working with them on their labs, because this is often something that they're not getting from a primary care doctor, they're often not getting this from a cardiologist either. And so if you can promote this to them, and maybe they don't do the test with you, but they'll go and ask another physician about it, then they bring their results back to you. However you are able to manage that, depending on what state you're in. This is a way that you can engage them to tell them, you know what, I recommend that you do this test. They bring their results back to you. And then now perhaps they're getting their fish oil from you. You have a conversation about bringing inflammation down. And the better their inflammation, the better their heart health, the better their liver health, the better their brain health, and so on, and the prevention of diseases and prevention of cancer. And we probably are the only practitioners that work on prevention, unfortunately. I mean, it's great that we're doing that, but I wish everybody were doing that. All healthcare practitioners were doing that, because I think the patients want this. They're not getting it anywhere else. And so we are in a very unique position to be able to do this with them. And so this is just maybe not day one, but maybe day two, that if it's a conversation about diet, then perhaps something like, I'll give them some tools, because anytime I take something out of their diet, I want to give them a replacement so they don't feel deprived and they feel like, okay, I can still kind of keep my lifestyle and I'm just going to do it a little bit differently. So instead of, say, a soda, they can do sparkling water and then flavor it with some natural things. And when I say the iced dandelion is actually pretty good with a touch of honey, so not a lot of honey. We were talking about the honey earlier. But I use honey as a transitional food. I use fruit as a transitional food. It could be something that can help them as they're transitioning from that sweet taste in their mouth to something that is less sweet, and then over time gradually eliminate the honey altogether. Pineapple and strawberries, like a little bit, like 1 or 2 pieces, and then blending it with ice, or you can even add that, like muddle it and put it into sparkling water, and some herbs, some fresh herbs. Really, really enjoyable and fun. And I might give people one of these, maybe not all of them, but I might ask them, like, what do you like? And then give them something like a way to transition off of the alcohol and soda. Especially during the pandemic, alcohol consumption went up very, very, very high. And it's still high. I think it's still really high. People got into these habits and they're still in these habits. So it could be, instead of having 3 glasses of wine, let's work on getting down to 2, and then maybe have one other thing, one of these, something else. And then starting off your night with one of these, and then maybe have a glass of wine with dinner, and then that's it. And not every day. I mean, a lot of people are having alcohol every day and multiple drinks, and they weren't doing that before. So it's kind of a different time for everybody, including us, right? So we're in this world too. But these could be some great alternatives. And then, and red meat, I don't think is altogether bad. So I don't want to convey that message that they should avoid red meat, but just, if it's somebody who is eating red meat multiple times a day and every day, then I will try to work with them on replacing it with fish, perhaps something that still has a good amount of protein in it, but perhaps something like that's a healthier alternative with some meat in their diet if they are a meat eater. But I determine where they are, so if they're eating meat twice a day, perhaps even maybe eggs for breakfast and then some sort of red meat for lunch and dinner, then I might just say, well, maybe every Monday, consider having lentil soup for lunch, or, every Tuesday have salmon for dinner instead of that steak or something like that. So it depends on how they're eating now, and then, just some alternatives to the meat. And then it's, a lot of people have a sweet tooth. So instead of a candy bar, these are transitional foods as well. And so they're very easy to make. And people sometimes will say, yeah, I really want to get off the sugar. And so these could be some great alternatives, maybe like frozen banana with a couple of chocolate chips, so that way it's like 5 chocolate chips instead of a whole candy bar, things like that, so that they'll still get that sweet treat without going overboard. And hopefully they're just going to stop at that point. But these are just some things that they can make very easily, easy to obtain ingredients, and again, transitional foods. So generally, if they're transitioning and they are currently eating a lot of sugar, then I will support them in replacing the sugar with fruit, because most people feel, a lot of people get really nervous when you take something away from them, especially when you take away sugar and alcohol. And so I want to give them something to replace it temporarily. And then once they get to about day 10 or so, they're a little bit more comfortable with letting go of some of the fruit, letting go of some of the alcohol. So I might not do all of that at once, but just an idea. And I won't do all of these things at once, just one or two of these things, and then that's it. And then I'll let them go and do that. And then usually there's a story when they come back, like, oh, this is what happened, or I went to the store and this is what happened. And guess what? I made chocolate truffles and I put some pumpkin seeds in it as well. And so they'll come up with their own ideas. And this is just giving them the framework and ideas. And then they'll go look online for recipes. And so they'll come back to you with those some recipes as well, or their experience with it. How did it go this week? You know, things like that. And so it's really kind of a fun way to connect with them in a different way. And then instead of bread, refined flour bread, you can learn to make your own. Almond flour waffles are amazing. We make buckwheat pancakes as well. Lentil and rice crepes, those are pretty good. It takes a couple of days to make them because they need to ferment. But those are really, really good. They're very easy to make, actually. So you can check out some recipes. And I'll usually give them a recipe. And if you have some of your favorites, you can give that to them. I'm sure many of you are doing that as well. Oatmeal cookies with peanut butter instead of sugar. Maybe as they're transitioning, they can make it an oatmeal cookie with maple syrup. And so they're starting to eliminate the refined sugars. And that could be a great transitional food. If they're having, I have a couple of patients, they have like tea and cookies every night. And so it's like, okay, keep the tea, but then they still want something else. So I might give them a recipe for oatmeal cookies, or I'll give them an actual product that they can go get at whatever market, and something that doesn't have refined sugar in it. And then once they've done that for, say, 2 or 3 weeks, then, okay, instead of having 3 cookies, let's work on having 2 now. Yeah, okay. And that alone can help them lose 1 or 2 pounds. And they're super happy about that, because now they're losing the weight, not only the weight, but the belly fat. And so they are still getting their sweet treats, but in a different way. And then this is, I mean, there's so many cleanses. This is a recipe that is a blend of many different recipes that I sort of came up with over time from my own experience, from patients, and just trying to get people to eat more greens. And I have a lot of different recipes. If anybody's interested, you know, please email me, and I'm happy to send those out. But there's so many different recipes. And actually, I think it was 2019. I want to say last year, but it wasn't last year. Maybe it was last year. My years are all mixed up now, but I think it was February 2020, actually. So it was last year. Actually had a cooking class, and it was so much fun because people were given these recipes, and they'd go home and they'd do it, and it's like, oh, I didn't like it. And I was like, really? It tastes so good. And they're like, no, it didn't taste good. And so over time, it turned into a cooking class, and it was really fun because it was a very great group of people. They all got to connect with each other. Just a really great level of engagement. And my goal was to get them to eat more greens. And so it's a very, very simple soup. You can put really any combination of these. It could be garlic, onions, carrot, just for some flavor. And then my goal, though, is to get the greens in. So it's beet greens, if you can, kale, Swiss chard, collard greens. Those are the ones I often push with people. Some people never eat those. I've never had them. And so this is a great introductory way to introduce them to having the greens. A lot of people don't like chewing the greens. So I'll make this kind of soup and have them make this kind of soup. And then I'll tell them to blend it. The blending really helps a lot, because then they're not chewing the greens, and it doesn't feel like you're eating this, you know, bark kind of food. It's just like a very nice savory dish. And once people have tasted it and they really like, oh, you know what, this is really good. It was really easy to make. It doesn't take a lot of hands-on time. I can make this soup in about maybe 5 minutes now, because I just put everything into the pot, let it simmer. Usually you can use water, you can use bone broth. Bone broth is a great way to support their digestive system as well. You can do some kind of veggie broth or just water. And depends on how much of a cook the person is. If they don't cook often, I'll keep it really, really simple. If they cook, then I'll give them a little bit more instruction. But I try to make it really easy, so that makes it doable, especially for people who don't cook a lot. The beets are a great way to cleanse the liver as well. The beet greens are amazing for the gallbladder too. And so get those in there if you can. And then any seasonings to taste, even, I don't even mind them putting the salt in, especially if it's a good quality salt, because again, it's just a food I'm using to transition from some of those other foods. And it's a really good way to get them to just do a short cleanse. Let's talk about cleansing a little bit. So again, depending on where the person is, I'll give them perhaps a beginner level intro, and it could be something like a 7 days. It could be 10 days, or if they're really willing, then I'll maybe do 21 or 28 days. And some people will say, oh yeah, I'm all in. I'm going to do this for a month. And then a couple of days go by and it's like, oh, it's a little too much. So I try to get them to commit to the 7 days, because if they can commit to 7 days, it doesn't sound like a long time. It sounds doable for most people, especially the people who get nervous about letting go of sugar and meat, especially. And it doesn't have to be the meat. You don't have to let go of meat. You can do any combination of these things. It might just be one of these foods, like, okay, for the next 7 days, no white flour. And instead, I want you to have, and it could be, whatever food you pick. But you're just connecting with them in a way that gets them to engage with having some mindfulness with what they are eating, because a lot of people eat sort of mindlessly and they don't really make that connection. They're just eating to eat and not necessarily to nourish their body. So, your patients really well, and some of them are at that place and some of them are not. So, the other piece that I'll often try to get them to do is to exercise for 20 minutes. And it could just be go out your door and walk for 20 minutes. If they have equipment, great. And if they don't, then march in place, do something, stand up, whatever it is, but just get them to move their body, because that in and of itself is detoxifying. And it's a really great way to flush the liver. And many people don't eat greens regularly. I always ask them when they tell me, oh yeah, I eat greens, I'll ask them what kind. Well, I eat broccoli and spinach and peas, celery, and they don't touch on the leafy greens. So I was like, oh, how about Swiss chard? What's that? So I'll have them go get Swiss chard, and then I'll give them a recipe to use Swiss chard. And that is one that tastes pretty good, especially if you're blending it into a soup. And or it might be just saute it with some garlic and have it with some wild salmon. So new food, one new food every couple of weeks. Don't want to overwhelm them. And first they have to go get it, then they got to cook it, then they got to eat it. So one new food is a lot, especially if they've never had it before. And if they've never had kale before, I might have them blended into a smoothie. They can chop up a little bit of Swiss chard, just a little bit, and throw that into some scrambled eggs. And maybe if they like spinach, then I'll have them mix spinach and Swiss chard. So that way they're introducing the Swiss chard, but it's not overwhelming to them. And sauteed collard greens, that's something they can chop up and maybe add some herbs and spices to it, and then have that with a black bean burger, quinoa burger, or something like that. But a way that makes it very easy for them. And then, of course, the water. So for most people, take half of their body weight and generally at least 60 ounces. Because if they're not drinking a lot of water, then they're going to be going to the bathroom every hour, and they get kind of frustrated with that. So I try to push it more so in the morning and then a little bit less toward the end of the day, so they're not getting up at night. But just another way to help flush their body, especially when they're detoxifying their system. That's another way to make sure that they are flushing the toxins out. And then depending on the level of engagement, and once I get to know the person for several weeks or even several months, then some of the long-term goals could be things like, when I say red meat, I'm talking about unhealthy meats like fast food or, food that's not organic, meats that's not organic. and animals that have eaten corn, things like that. So trying to really limit that. Again, if it's a special event or whatever, it's like a favorite food of theirs, then I'll say, you know, once a week, and then that's it. Consuming some dark leafy greens every day, that's a big goal, and that's a hard one for a lot of people. But if you don't give them 10 things to do and you give them one thing to do, one piece of homework, and that's your homework, it's like every day I want you to have some dark leafy greens every single day. And that's all I give them for homework. It makes a little bit more noise in their mind of like, oh, I have to eat greens every day. And that's all she told me to do. So there's not a lot of homework. So sometimes I might just start with that. And then eventually over time, okay, now let's start to explore some other veggies and give them other things. Maybe they've never had beets before. Maybe they've never had whatever, you know, any food, whatever it is. I really try to get them to have a wide variety of vegetables. And I generally try to keep a little bit of flexibility with their diet in regard to sugar. You know, I tell them, like, if it's a special event or something like that, or you really want something sweet, then go ahead and have whatever, a pancake with some maple syrup, a healthy pancake. But I do tell them avoid high fructose corn syrup 100%, just because it's such a toxic food, and it does, I think, the effect accumulates over time. Same with fructose. I mean, of course, naturally occurring fructose in fruit. I do try to bring down the fruit consumption to, depends on the person. I know somebody asked me like how many fruits per day. It really depends on the person. If they've got excellent blood sugar levels and their hemoglobin A1C is great, and they generally don't have any inflammatory conditions, then they can have, you know, I would say 2 to 3 a day, especially in the summer. I do try to bring that down a little bit during other times of the year, but summer fruits, people really love them. And so sometimes if they don't have any problems, then I'll say, you know, sure, go ahead, but keep the veggies in, keep all the other things in. So the fruit usually is something that I use as a treat. I treat it as a dessert. And so when they're having fruit, treat it as a dessert, not as a healthy food. It's there as a treat and not something to use as an essential food. It's not an essential food. Avoid sugar or limit it to special occasions only. Avoid white flour products. Manage pain naturally as much as possible. So if, you know, I'm a physical therapist as well, as you know, and so many people can get over their pain just by doing some exercises, some stretching, managing their stress. There's a lot of other ways. I've had people buying different types of equipment to do like self-massage, things like that. So, and then of course there's herbal medicine and some other supplements that can help them with their pain. CBD is great, topical CBD, oral CBD. There's so many options. And so if they can start to get off of the narcotics gradually, that's quite profound, the results that you can see. Exercising, we mentioned that earlier, limiting the TV time as a long-term goal, because that does impact sleep patterns, etc., and stress levels, especially if they're watching the news, and surrounding yourself with happy people and positive messages. And that's a big one too, because, you know, as adults, we don't often hear that from, we don't get a lot of advice, right? We kind of do what we want and we're not told what to do. You know, children get told a lot of things, but as adults, we're not often told like, well, like, why are you still engaging with that person? Or why don't you limit your time with that person? You know, things like that. Or why are you watching the news every night? So that might be something that's, you know, a different level of conversation with certain people. But I've had a lot of people give up their TV time and they find like all this time to do really other enjoyable things. And it's really interesting to see people's sleep patterns change, their stress levels improve when they do start to reduce the time with TV. And any questions, you know, and if you have questions after today, please feel free to email me. I don't think anyone's using the phone anymore, but feel free to call as well. But email me if you like, and I'm here to answer any questions. As I mentioned, you know, I have a lot of different recipes that are really fun, and we can, you know, if you have recipes you want to share with me, please send those as well. I'm always looking for new things to share with people.
Thank you so much. That was such a great webinar. Really quick before we get into the questions, because we actually have a lot of them, I'd like you to just give maybe like a 30 to 60 second description of the class that you're going to be teaching on June 5th for anybody that's still here.
Okay, thank you. So I have a class coming up June 5th. This is computer overuse syndrome. We'll be talking about specific exercises and ergonomics for neck and shoulder pain. So I hope to see you there. It is approved by the NCCAOM, and California CEUs are available as well.
Perfect. And there is a link in everybody's email that you'll be getting 5 minutes after we end. So take a look at that email and you'll get a link there as well as a discount at LASA OMS. So now, without further ado, let's get into the questions because there's actually a ton of them and really good ones too. So first question, do you recommend small, frequent meals or just 3 meals a day?
Wow. I know you guys are going to have some great questions. That's a great question. I don't want to keep saying it depends, but it depends. It depends on the person and it depends on their metabolism. My goal usually is to get them to eat 2 to 3 meals. Again, depends on the person. But if they're currently having 5 or 6 small meals, then I'll work with them on that. It depends on what they're doing when they come in. If they have a blood sugar issue, then I might have them eat more often. But if they're trying to lose weight and they're not having any digestive issues, they don't have any adrenal issues, things like that, then I might try to work on having them have maybe not even a bigger meal, but just a more well-rounded meal for breakfast, a well-rounded meal for lunch, and then perhaps one for dinner. But I think quality of digestion tends to improve when they're eating 3 medium-sized meals versus multiple times throughout the day. I do see insulin improve significantly when they're eating less often. And I do see blood sugar improve and weight improve as well. Because then now they have a chance to drop their insulin. When they're eating so often, their insulin just stays elevated all day. Of course, it depends on what they're eating too. But generally, I'm striving to have them eat a meal and then have a break, like 3, 4, 5 hours in between meals would be ideal. 5 hours is really ideal.
Wow. Okay, I don't do that. Next question. Are liver diseases like fatty liver reversible? Which I think you might have touched on.
Yeah. In the early stage, yes, it is reversible. And even, I would say middle stage, reversible in the sense that in middle stage, people are starting to get some scarring, but there's still fat in the liver. And so that part of it is still reversible. So yes, it can be reversed. And I've seen it reversed in a very, very short period of time. If somebody eliminates sugar, I've seen people reverse it almost 100% in a very short period of time. It is reversible.
All right. How about, do you recommend a gallbladder flush olive oil to help with the liver?
Yeah. Again, if you've got a patient who's at that level and they're willing to do something like that, then yeah, that could be great as well. Yeah, definitely.
And then do you have any specific like herbal formulas or whole foods that you specifically recommend?
I really like beet greens, beets as well, but beet greens. And usually people are not eating them. Even if they're buying beets, a lot of people throw the beet greens away. I was like, don't throw those away. They're a superfood. And so that's one I really like. I really like spirulina a lot as well. And I use a lot of herbal medicine, but I'm really trying to target people's diet. And because if they start to eat these foods, they're going to do it forever, and hopefully they'll do it forever. So herbal medicine I use if there's a problem of some kind, but I don't usually use liver cleanse herbs forever. It might be a short period of time, like let's say for whatever that period is, 3 or 4 weeks. And then at that point, the goal is for them to take over with their diet. So usually I'm trying to work on their diet anyway. So the herbs, there's so many liver cleansing herbs. There's so many that we use in traditional Chinese medicine, even in Western herbology as well. So there's many, many different herbs that I like. But I generally tend to focus on the food. And the reason is I find that most people make really great improvement with the food alone, that they don't often need the herbs. And that's been something I've seen over time. When they're really changing their food and their diet, then they don't often need the herbs.
All right. Well, we really have great questions tonight, which not that we don't get them every time, but like tonight, they're very good. Do you recommend the tradition of eating liver to support the liver and blood health?
Yes. Yes. And, and hopefully, I've seen people who've had trouble getting good quality liver. Depends on where you live, but if you can get great quality liver and it's cleanly sourced, then yes, for sure.
And then do you recommend a kidney cleanse to help with the liver?
Also, yeah, because kidney cleansing, liver cleansing, they overlap. I mean, if we're cleaning the liver, people like the word liver cleanse, but it's a full body cleanse. And so when we're cleaning the liver, we're also going to clean the kidneys as well. And vice versa. If you do a kidney flush, you're also going to get toxins out. And then that in and of itself can help the liver as well. And
then can you talk a little bit about coconut sugar? And actually, can I sandwich something in because I want to know? Also, can you talk about stevia a little bit?
Yeah. Coconut sugar still is sugar. Also, it's a little bit more popular now, but it is still sugar. And so it's one of those foods I use as a sweet treat. If somebody wants something sweet, then they can have it as a sweet treat, but it's still sugar. So, if the goal is to get off of sugar completely, then that is also one that is important to remove. And I know it's tough for a lot of people, but, there are some that are better. Somebody asked about monk fruit. That could be a better sweetener, but it really depends on how often the person's having the sweetener. So generally, if you're trying to reduce sugar, ideally maybe once or twice a week, maybe even less, which sounds really infrequent. But if you're eating this way, then it's not something alarming. And so if you have a patient who's on board and they'll say, I'll do whatever you tell me, and they want to do it cold turkey, then they can. Most people have a hard time with that. And so I usually try to do it very, very gradually. Like this week, this is our goal. This week, this is our goal, and gradually increase the goals. If you give them a small goal and they don't accomplish it, then we're still working on that goal. And I don't necessarily add another goal because they haven't accomplished that one yet. So again, for a lot of people, they're already stressed and they're feeling overwhelmed. I don't want to give them more on their plate, literally and figuratively.
Oh, that's so funny. Next question. What bread and pasta substitutes do your patients find the most tolerable?
I'm sorry to get that.
What bread and pasta substitutes do your patients find the most tolerable?
Red lentil pasta is an often, popular one. And I try not to do brown rice pasta because it is still going to raise their blood sugar. So I don't mind them doing red lentil pasta. And people really like that one actually with pesto or, any other sauce that's like really, really good. I just tell them put more sauce on because it does absorb a lot of liquid. So that's a really nice one. Pasta. And then what was the other question?
It was pasta and bread.
Bread. Okay. Bread's kind of tricky. I do refer them to teff, T-E-F-F. So teff tortillas are an option. Buckwheat, if they can find buckwheat, it's a little bit harder to find, but teff is not that hard to find as a tortilla. Sometimes I'll do almond flour tortillas, and there's actually some pretty good brands that are pretty good, and they can do that as a wrap. I didn't answer the question about bread because there really aren't that many. I do make my own with almond flour and seeds, and that is actually really, really good. It's almond flour and seeds, and you can pull up a ton of recipes if you look for almond flour bread. And it's very easy to make, and it tastes really good. And you can toast it. You can make a sandwich with it. And of course, it tastes different, but it's something that many patients have actually enjoyed. And they really, at that point, once they have that, they don't miss the regular bread. So it is a nice transitional, not even transitional, it's a nice food actually to have once in a while.
Guessing it's a little dry though.
The one I make is not dry. I put in, it's 4 eggs, and I did start putting in a little bit of either olive oil or a little bit of butter, and then it's not so dry. So, but yeah, it does have a liquid issue because the almond flour is quite absorbent. So having a little bit of the oil in there is helpful.
All right. Good to know. Wow. Really great questions today. What is a daily sugar intake guide in general? Also, should this include naturally occurring sugars?
Daily sugar intake? Is that the question?
Yep.
Okay. It depends on their blood sugar, but if I'm looking at hemoglobin A1C, which is one thing I look at in almost everybody, if they're hovering borderline-ish, or they're in the diabetic range, to me, that would be 5.8 or higher, which is, generally not the numbers that labs use. It's generally not the numbers that physicians use. But if it's higher than that, then I am often trying to get them down to 0, which is something that's pretty drastic for a lot of people. But as a number, I'm trying to get down to about 30 grams of carbohydrates per day. And it's, it's a big change for a lot of people. So that's not something that is overnight. It's something that is probably over several months. But if they're coming in and they're eating, like a Frappuccino or something for breakfast and cereal and a bagel, maybe those kinds of foods. And then lunch is some sort of, I don't know, maybe not totally unhealthy, but let's say it's like a burrito of some kind. So you've got that white flour tortilla, and then dinner is chicken and rice and a vegetable, something like that. So not totally bad, but not totally great. But that person's going to be... what I might do with that person is try to do one thing, which is, well, why don't we lose the tortilla for lunch and have a bowl instead of a burrito? And so we take the tortilla out, and that might be it. But generally, I'm striving for almost 0, which for a lot of people might be a lot. But if you can get them down like 50% from where they are, and if they do it and they listen to your recommendations, then you do another 50% and so on. It is doable, and the diet would be something like eggs and avocado in the morning with maybe some spinach or Swiss chard, tea, something like that. And then lunch could be a bowl of some kind. Maybe it's beans and quinoa, or chicken and a salad or something like that, or tuna and salad, something like that. And then dinner could be salmon, vegetables, and maybe 2 or 3 vegetables for dinner. And that's it. So there is a way to make it, there is a way to get down to 0. And it's not a diet that feels like you're being deprived. It's something that is just a very, very different way of eating.
Absolutely. And how are you feeling on time? Because we probably have like about 10 more questions.
Okay, I'm good if everybody's good. Thanks for staying, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see people dropping off, so let's keep going.
Okay.
Do you have a lab that you suggest for hair analysis?
I use ARL, and that's the one I use. It's in Phoenix. And they do actually have an account set up for us. And it's a really nice opportunity, actually, because you can use that as you can sell, basically you're almost like selling the patient the test. And then I usually do it in the office. And so I'll take the hair from the patient in the office. And then you can actually mark up that fee. So it is a good source of income as well.
All right. And then next question, is a histamine reaction rash also a sign of needing to detox the liver?
Maybe. Yeah. I need more information, but yeah, it could be.
Okay. And then curious, and this is also about labs. I'm curious what lab companies that you like to use for reliable blood work that is affordable for people and accessible.
Probably, PCS. It's often advertised in our acupuncture newsletter and things like that. So PCS is in Florida, and they do not take insurance. So it's designed for us. If you're in a state that allows you to do lab testing, then you can set up an account with them, and it is relatively affordable.
All right. There's actually a bunch of people wanted to know that, so that was a good question. Can you suggest some vegetarian sources of omega-3 and omega-6?
It's a big question and a good question. So when I look at the research, you probably know this already, but there's many different chemical conversions that need to happen to get from something, say, like flaxseed, which is a good source. But to get to really the final product, the body has to go through a conversion. And I don't see in the literature that it's a great source of omega-3. I mean, it does have some, same with hemp seeds as well, but it does have some, but not a lot. And I don't think that it has the levels that we really need to get up to the, say, the 1,000 milligram mark, or 2,000 even for some people. I don't think it's enough. And there are some algae that have some as well. But again, I think they're generally, they're great sources, but they're relatively low.
Sounds good. And then ultimately, how much fruit per day do you recommend?
Yeah, generally, if their blood sugar is elevated, then I try to bring that down to almost 0 and focus a little bit more on the vegetables. If they're, say, 5.8 or higher, and that is something that we're working on, whether it's to reduce the blood sugar and or inflammation, perhaps they have some heart disease and or liver disease, kidney issues, whatever it may be, I'll tell them, if they can get from 5.8 to 5.7, they're improving their health X percentage, whatever that would be for that person. It depends on the state of disease that they're in. And if we can bring that down just a little bit, it could really help a lot. To give you an example, like I have a patient right now who's quite lean. She's in really great shape. She's 74. She's really engaged in her health, and she's at 5.9. And she eats almost no sugar, like no processed sugar, but she eats like 4 or 5 fruits a day. And I just told her, I said, you're doing a great job. So I commended her and did all of that. I said, you're doing a great job, but I think the fruit is somehow affecting your blood sugar, and let's work on bringing that down. So it was hard for her, but she did it. And she did it for about 6 months, and it was really difficult for her. But she did. She got her A1C down to 5.6, which is really a big change for her. And she feels better. Mentally, emotionally, she tells me her concentration is better. I mean, she doesn't have a lot of problems, so it's really, not a big change, but she does say that her sleep has gotten deeper. She doesn't get tired as much. So there's been a lot of, and to me, that's a pretty profound change in somebody who's already very, very healthy. So to answer the question, I would say 0. I'm not against fruit, but if somebody's, say, 5.4, 5.5, and they don't have any problems, we're probably not seeing them. So those people, sure, you can have 2 or 3 fruits a day. But if somebody's got an energy issue, or they're feeling like this blood sugar crash kind of issue, or they've got some weight to lose, you're suspecting heart disease or liver problem or any of the other problems I mentioned, concentration, it's pretty profound what you see when you take out all sugars. And that includes the grains, the fruit as well, and of course, sugar. That can create a really different person,
All right. Wow, we just have so many questions. Let's do just a couple more because it's actually getting pretty late here. We're on the East Coast. Let's see. And actually kind of piggyback on that last question, are there any fruits that you would at least consider better than others?
Yeah, probably berries, just because they're so beneficial that I think the positives and the minuses sort of they sort of balance each other out. There's some sugar there, of course, but they're not high in sugar. So raspberries, blueberries, and I think the benefits are great. And some people really have a hard time without sugar. And so I use it as a treat, maybe like frozen blueberries, like 10 frozen blueberries. I'm not extreme in any way with anybody. But if they're willing to do the work and they're willing to take the fruits out, then that's sort of the way I'll give them like a little fruit treat. Like that's your dessert. You're doing this cleanse for X amount of time, but then you have this sweet treat to look forward to on Friday night. And that's blueberries and I don't know, plain Greek yogurt or something like that. And then they really eat it slowly and they really enjoy it. And now they are mindful of, I can't have fruit all week. And now I love these 10 blueberries. And so it's a different relationship and a different interaction with the fruit. And so now it's viewed as a dessert and something extra and not just, oh, I'm eating fruit every day. Most people eat fruit every day, I think. That's what it seems like to me. So when you take out fruit for a day, you're creating this level of awareness that perhaps they didn't have before.
Wow, you really know how to party on a Friday night. Quick question about your seminar. Is it going to be recorded? So if somebody can't attend live, would they be able to watch the recording and still get the CEUs?
Great question. I'm not recording it. I really prefer to do it live because it is kind of this engagement. Like I love the questions. And so it does really make it a lot more fun and interactive and more personal to do it live. So I'm not planning to record it this time, maybe in the future.
Okay, so let's just do one more question. Do you have anything to say about intermittent fasting with a 6-hour window, but then eat fairly constant during that window versus eating the three meals separated?
Fantastic question. Can we do another seminar on that, Jeff?
Sure. I mean, I think it's like 5 seminars to spin off of this one.
Yeah, really. I would love to do intermittent fasting. I mean, I do that myself actually very often and with a lot of patients too. But, to intermittent fast, you have to be ready. And so I look for blood sugar stability because if they're fasting and their blood sugar is not stable and they can't handle not eating, then they're not ready for intermittent fasting. So when we're talking about going from 5 or 6 meals a day to 3 meals a day, if they're already having a hard time with that, then that's not a good candidate for intermittent fasting. But it depends on why you're doing the intermittent fasting. If you're just doing it for inflammation, brain health, things like that, then yeah, you could eat during that 6-hour window. And you can have 3 meals during that 6-hour window. I think it's just a lot of food. But if they're small meals and you're keeping a 6-hour window, sure. If you don't have weight to lose and you don't have any of those other issues and you just want the benefits, then fine. If it's someone who's doing it to lose weight, or they're working on perhaps a memory issue or concentration issue, or they're trying to reduce calories, they're trying to improve the health of their liver, they're trying to improve their metabolism, especially with weight loss. I don't want them cramming all their calories in 6 hours. They will still lose weight because they've got this really long window without food. They'll still lose weight. So it's really up to you. I would say it depends on the person. So I think it's fine to have those 3 meals during 6 hours, but I think it's a lot of food in a short window. So, I generally pose it as, let's skip breakfast once a week, have your regular lunch, don't eat more because you skipped breakfast, and have your regular dinner or even a smaller dinner. And there's so many ways to do intermittent fasting. Sometimes it could just be smaller meals for the entire day. So you're just reducing calories. It could be a time type of fasting, which you mentioned, like narrowing the window. So we can do another talk on intermittent fasting, but there's so many ways to do intermittent fasting. But yeah, you could do 3 meals in 6 hours if you want to. That's fine.
And then really quickly, what was the lab in Florida that you said that you used? Do you know the name so I can look up the website for somebody?
Yeah, it's Professional Co-op Services. So it's PCS.
Professional Co-op Services. Oh, I cannot type today. Okay, perfect. Got it. Okay. Looks like a price list, but we'll still put it in here for Joy. All right. Well, I cannot thank you enough. Oh, I just did the wrong thing.
I'm going back. Somebody asked for the email address.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody. It was really fun, and hope you got something out of today's talk, and I look forward to seeing you again.
It was so much fun. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who attended tonight. Our next webinar is going to be on June the 8th. It's going to be abdominal palpation and diagnosis featuring Dr. Cameron Bishop. Please don't miss it. And then also on June the 15th, we're going to have John Chen coming back to talk about post-COVID syndrome, vaccinations, and TCM. So we got a lot of good content coming up. Check out Dr. Lund's upcoming seminar on the 5th of June. And everyone have a wonderful, wonderful Memorial Day weekend.
Great to see everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Dr. Lund. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much. Good night.